They call it the biggest single construction project since the Egyptians built the pyramids, an oil umbilical bisecting the entire state of Alaska. 60 Minutes has made several trips north since the pipeline began to see how it's affecting our last frontier and the people who live there. This time we were prompted by stories that Alaska had become a state gone wild and permeated by organized crime. There were published reports of a runaway crime wave, of so much theft and violence and vice that the law was left strung out helplessly in its wake. Well, frankly, we never found that. Our own experience was that it's probably safer on the streets of Anchorage and Fairbanks than in most places down here. But we did find something that has many Alaskans increasingly worried. It's a union, Teamsters Local 959, a single local loosely tied to the International Union, a single local that legally has become so powerful that some people are wondering, who really runs Alaska?
Now there's a road up north of Fairbanks, a kamikaze trail's well known.
The trucking industry in Alaska is almost as legendary in song and lore as the search for gold. The terrain makes it virtually impossible to build railroads, and inland freight transportation by water is nil. The industry has mushroomed, especially with the building of the Alaska pipeline. 800 miles of work for thousands of Teamsters. That, plus employment the pipeline has generated throughout the rest of Alaska, has pushed membership rolls to over 23,000. And that's in a state with a total population of about 300,000. And in case you think you know what Teamsters do, listen to this. Local 959 represents some 80 different crafts and trades in Alaska. Naturally, the truck drivers are all Teamsters. So are warehousemen. So are the warehouse clerks. Out on the oil rigs, the drillers are Teamsters. The roughnecks are Teamsters. The surveyors are Teamsters. A lot of operating engineers are Teamsters. Radio operators are Teamsters.
Long distance? Yeah.
Long distance operators are Teamsters. So are the telephone technicians. The Teamsters negotiate for the school principals in Fairbanks, the policemen in Anchorage.
On the Alaskan scene today, there's
some local television technicians and reporters want the Teamsters to represent them. The butchers are Teamsters, the bakers are Teamsters, and would you believe, the candlestick makers are not Teamsters.
I missed those, I guess, but we'll look into it tomorrow morning.
He isn't yet as famous here as Sam McGee and Dangerous Dan McGrew, but he may well be someday. His name is Jesse L. Carr, the undisputed boss of Alaskan Teamster Local 959 for 20 years. He was a truck driver in California who came here in 1950. By the 1960s, he was powerful enough to tell Jimmy Hoffa to keep his international union out of Alaska and get away with it. Now he's built such a labor empire that we had to ask Governor Jay Hammond, have the Teamsters bought Alaska?
Not yet. I think the capability of doing so is there. I think that capability should be reduced significantly.
But saying it is one thing, doing it another. Jess Carr is, without doubt, the chairman of the board, certainly of the Alaska Teamsters, some would say of the whole state. In any boardroom or barroom, mention his name and somebody will tell you a story.
True or false? Negotiating session. Company came in with an offer. You let it sit there for a minute, picked it up, wadded it up, threw it in the wastepaper basket, and kicked the wastepaper basket across the room at them.
Oh, that's not true. But let me tell you what I did do. Part of it's true. And maybe I shouldn't say this because employers then get wise to your negotiating tricks. It's been a habit of mine over the years to say, okay, here's your demands. Put it in the wastepaper basket. I don't want to talk about your demands. I don't want to talk about your contract. I want to talk about my demands. If you can get those employers talking about your demands, well, half the battle's won.
The man who began organizing Alaska in a 1936 Dodge now has a fleet of planes that would be the envy of most large corporations. 2 Merlin turboprops and 2 Lear jets to carry Teamster executives around the state and on business trips to the lower 48.
And also they are used as medevac planes. See? If one of our people would get hurt, or the doctors in our hospital says that we don't have the expertise in this area to treat that person, they would take them to any place in the country that had that particular equipment or treatment.
Any other union in Alaska have that?
No, sir. Just Ussens.
Just Ussens. And if you want to see why Ussens have the loyal support of 23,000 workers, fly over to Fairbanks for a look at their new facilities. Free for Teamsters and their families.
This is our new union headquarters. Our offices will be based here, plus our pharmacy, the banks, dental clinic will be on the 3rd floor. And then over here on this side will be our recreation center, which is, we'll have 4 inside tennis courts, Olympic-sized swimming pool, handball courts, and et cetera. The other end is where our hospital will be built.
In Anchorage, it's the same thing all over again. $37 million worth of the finest office, recreational, and hospital facilities to be found in Alaska. How much of a member's medical and hospital care is paid by the union?
It's paid 100%.
100%?
Yes, sir.
How much for his family?
All of it for his family, dental, anything that he might have medically is taken care of 100%. He doesn't pay anything.
What about when he retires?
When he retires, he also has 100%. Doesn't do any good to retire a guy and send him out at $1,500, $2,000 a month or whatever, and then have the hospital, bills that might accrue. So he's covered for the rest of his life, and so is his family.
Free medical care for life, $1,500 to $2,000 a month retirement pay. They also get free legal assistance. You probably wonder how much it costs each worker for all these benefits.
Well, the member doesn't put in anything, it's in lieu of wages.
Well, this is what I don't understand.
Yeah.
Basic wage scale on the pipeline for your members is what?
Well, it goes anywhere from $11 an hour to $15 an hour.
Let's take $11 an hour.
All right.
I'm a member of the Teamsters Union.
Right.
I make
The figures are confusing, but boiled down, it means that employers, besides paying wages of $11 to $15 an hour, pay an additional $3.18 an hour into Teamster benefit funds. Those payments are now averaging $1 million a week. The pension fund alone is topping $100 million. All of it funneled through and invested in Alaska by this bank, where Carr sits on the board of directors. It's estimated that 10% of all capital investment in the state now is Teamster money.
Can you look me in the eye and tell me so far as you know that your pension plan is super clean?
Dan, if it isn't, I'll jump off of this roof on my head. Every dollar that goes in that bank is invested by that bank. Just Carr doesn't have any portion of it. Any of our business agents, we don't even borrow the money to build our own homes with from that pension plan. And I'll look you straight in the eye. As far as I'm concerned, that's the cleanest pension plan in the United States, and it's going to remain that way.
But add that kind of financial wallop to the estimate that 20% of all voters in Alaska are Teamsters, and some will say things have gotten out of hand.
And I know a lot of politicians tremble in their boots at the very suggestion of Jess Carr being affronted by something they say or do.
Among corporation leaders, businessmen, and politicians, is it the habit to stand up to him?
Not that I've seen. I couldn't name on the fingers of half a hand those who have stood up to him.
Well, the fact is most people are afraid of him, aren't they?
Well, either that or they're very friendly with him.
Hammond and Carr are the two most powerful men in Alaska, and to understand their feud is to understand the biggest issue in this massive state today. The governor is a bush pilot, a registered hunting guide. He looks out here and worries that fast development of Alaska's vast mineral resources will destroy what he holds most dear. Jess Carr looks at the same wilderness, thinks about the natural resources under all this, and he sees jobs, jobs, jobs. Governor Hammond and Jesse Carr have squared off like a couple of Alaskan grizzlies, and sometimes it's gotten rough.
Did you refer to the governor as an SOB?
Yes, I did. But, you have to know me. You've been with me all day, and you know some manner in which I use English language, I do cuss from time to time. I really didn't mean that. I think he knows that.
I at first was affronted by that, but then somebody told me what he must have meant was I was a somewhat officious bureaucrat. And I thought, well, if that's the case, I'm not quite that disturbed.
Alaskans today are almost a split personality. On the one hand, trying to preserve what has made them unique among Americans, while at the same time, for the first time, coping with traffic jams and crowded streets caused by the oil boom. Like Hammond and Carr, they'll argue endlessly about what ought to be done. But if you want to see them unite like a pack of wolves, let an outsider, a flatlander, try and tell them what's wrong with Alaska. Enter an investigative report by the Los Angeles Times, reprinted in dozens of newspapers across the country. The first paragraph reads, quote, "Widespread lawlessness, a helpless government, and the stranglehold of a single Teamsters union chief severely threaten the state crucial to the nation's future energy independence. End of quotation. The skyrocketing cost of the pipeline was attributed in large part to just Carr's lucrative contracts, featherbedding, and a runaway crime wave leaving little law west of the Yukon.
But I've talked to local police authorities, state police authorities, municipal police authorities, federal police authorities, and the type of criminal activity attributed to Alaska in the LA Times article just isn't present in the view of any of them.
Alaska's Attorney General, Abram Gross.
We've got 21,000 construction workers put down in a state of roughly 300 to 400,000 people. And the results are exactly what you'd expect. We do have increases in prostitution. We have increases in gambling. We have increases in nearly all phases of crime, but they're not unexpected increases.
As for the pipeline project itself, the LA Times quoted sources as saying that theft ranged anywhere from tens of millions of dollars up to $1 billion. To the latter, the pipeline company replied that if all the work camps and all the heavy equipment, plus all the spare parts were stolen, that still wouldn't add up to any $1 billion. The company has tightened its security along the line and estimates that to date, they've lost $335,000. That's a sum most people find is hard to believe as the $1 billion figure. Of course, there is one part of that LA Times report the governor tends to agree with.
Insofar as the stranglehold attributed to one labor leader, that probably comes closer to being accurate than the other assertions. And if it isn't a stranglehold, it's certainly an arm lock and something to be reckoned with.
You do have the power to shut the state down economically if you choose to do so.
Yeah, but I wouldn't do that. Well, that's the easiest thing to say, Dan. If we took a stranglehold on the state, we're strangleholding ourselves. Because so goes this state, so goes the members I represent.
I would like to see the same constraints imposed upon labor, big labor, that should be imposed on big government or big business, antitrust constraints or what have you. But with a legislature that inevitably is going to be a politically sensitive group and with the capability to wield the political clout the Teamsters have, the likelihood of accomplishing anything that significantly restrains that potential is not great. I readily admit it.
And you have to remember now, the governor's opponent of ours, we tried to beat him in the last election. So I think he's going to do anything he can to see that our resources are used up in that area.
The translation of what you said as I read it is that you didn't get out your vote the last time.
That's correct.
If you'd gotten out your vote, you would have won it.
We would have won.
And you'll get it out the next time.
I hope. We're going to work hard on it.
This oil up here is going to cost Americans far beyond what anyone imagined. This year's final pipeline cost estimate is $7 billion. That's $600 million higher than last year's so-called final estimate. Some will point to the lush wages and benefits in union contracts, but Big Oil was told by Washington to get that oil out now, so they're paying for no-strike contracts. Longtime Alaskans, construction supervisors, will sooner point to tens of millions of dollars in cost overruns because the pipeline company failed to realize that equipment which works fine in Texas sets idle when it's 40 below, or they'll gripe about trying to get a day's work out of people making more money than a lot of oil company executives, or the cost of heavy construction in this godforsaken climate. Things like this, $9,000 you're looking at. They have 300 $9,000 double-seated, superheated, so-called thunder huts to keep the bottoms of Jess Carr's Teamsters warm. And down the road, well, Jess Carr couldn't be happier, thank you. His Teamster drillers way up north tell him the public doesn't know it yet, but little doubt there's more oil under all that ice than in the whole of Saudi Arabia. And little doubt that this is only the first of several pipelines that will cross Alaska. Little doubt it will be very, very expensive oil. And who will pay the tab? Have no doubt.